Every now and then, we go back to a game we haven't played in years. Maybe it's because we loved it growing up, or maybe it's just a game that stuck with us long after we finished it. Some games feel tied to the era they were made in. You can go back to them years later and immediately feel the age due to dated graphics, awkward mechanics, and an experience that just doesn't hold up in a way that you remember. However, there are also games that seem almost immune to time. No matter how many years pass, they're still just as engaging, just as memorable, and just as easy to fall into as the day they were released. You start playing, and within minutes it feels like no time has passed at all. The game still works, the atmosphere still pulls you in, the experience still feels just as engaging as it must have when players first discovered it decades ago. Games like Chrono Trigger and Super Mario Galaxy are still beloved decades later, and this isn't due to nostalgia, it's because they were genuinely well made. This raised the question to me, which is, what exactly makes a game feel timeless? One of the most common traits shared by timeless games is surprisingly simple, and it's the clarity. Ideas that are straightforward and easy to engage with create an experience that transcends technological limitations. Within minutes, you know exactly what the game is asking of you, and yet mastering it can take weeks, months, or even years. Take something like Tetris. The entire game can be explained in a matter of seconds since the concept is so simple. Blocks fall from the top of the screen, and your goal is to simply arrange them into complete lines before the stack reaches the top. It's an incredibly straightforward concept, yet it remains just as compelling today as it was when it first released. Despite being a game that came out in 1984, the original game was so successful that it spawned hundreds of different sequels and versions, some of which are still widely played today. The same idea applies to games like Super Mario 64. At its core, the game is about movement through running, jumping, and exploring spaces in ways that feel intuitive and satisfying. Those mechanics were so well designed that they helped shape how 3D platformers would work for years to come. Despite certain aspects of it like the camera not aging well, the simplicity behind the game's core design is what makes it stand the test of time. Even today, the game remains incredibly popular among speedrunners, largely because of how responsive and expressive its movement system still feels. A modern example of this philosophy can be seen in Portal 1 and 2. They give players the ability to create two linked portals that objects and characters can travel through. It's such a simple idea, and yet it's the foundation for a variety of different puzzles, with each one building on the last. They gradually teach the player new ways to think about space and movement. There's a brilliance in how much it accomplishes with such a clear and focused concept. Games like these aren't built around trends or temporary ideas. Instead, they focus on mechanics that are immediately understandable but rewarding to engage with again and again. Long after graphics improve and technology evolves, this kind of design philosophy allows for experiences that stick with us long after the original release. While clarity and simplicity can help a game remain engaging over time, they don't fully explain why certain experiences stay with us for years or even decades. Many timeless games succeed not just because of how they play, but because of the worlds that they create. These are the kinds of games that give players places that feel memorable long after the game itself is finished. Players may forget specific mechanics or details, but they often remember the feeling of exploring those environments for the first time. A great example of this can be seen in Chrono Trigger. Instead of taking place in a single setting, the game allows players to travel across multiple eras, from prehistoric landscapes to distant futures. Each time period feels distinct, with its own characters, atmosphere, and a sense of history. Despite being an SNES game, the world feels expansive and full of personality, mainly due to the ambition that was behind it. Decades later, players can still recall these places and the journey between them. Moments like discovering a new era or seeing how the world changes across time becomes part of the experience in a way that stays with the player long after the story ends. As a Gen Z person myself, I didn't play Chrono Trigger until 2020, and the different time settings of the game felt so distinct and creative. Zeal in particular is an all-time favorite location for me in a video game. Despite releasing in 1995, I can't say that anything about it has aged poorly in my opinion. It just goes to show how timeless of a game it is, no pun intended. When a game creates a world that feels cohesive and memorable, players aren't just returning to it for the gameplay alone, they're returning to revisit a place that left an impression on them the first time around. Another aspect that's arguably one of the most important is how the game is visually perceived and presented. This can relate to graphical fidelity, art style, or the overall aesthetics of a game. One of the biggest reasons that games don't age well is because the visuals become outdated. Some games avoid this problem entirely through a strong, distinctive art direction. Take Super Mario Galaxy for example. While the graphics themselves are clearly from another era, the vibrant colors, imaginative designs, and beautifully crafted levels allow for a visual identity that feels timeless. You don't notice the polygons or the texture quality, because the style itself communicates the world and experience so clearly. The same applies to many stylized games like The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker and Okami. Their visuals aren't trying to mimic reality, but instead embrace a deliberate style that's visually striking and memorable. By focusing on a coherent, aesthetic art style instead of a raw realism, these games don't feel old, even as decades pass. Take a look at this side-by-side comparison. On the left, we have the original Wind Waker, and on the right, we have the original Mafia. Both of these games released in 2002, but in my opinion, the art style of Wind Waker has aged much better since it didn't aim for a realistic look. You can even see this in how the games have been preserved. Mafia eventually received a full remake, while Wind Waker has since only received remasters. Its visual style simply didn't need to be reinvented. In essence, timeless aesthetics don't rely on technology but on a vision. When a game looks cohesive, unique, and emotionally resonant, it can remain visually captivating long after its release. Good aesthetics invite players into a world, communicate a tone, and help to make experiences unforgettable. Another reason some games feel timeless is because their stories resonate far beyond the moment they were released. While technology, mechanics, and graphics inevitably change over time, powerful storytelling will always endure. When a game captures universal themes like loss, identity, hope, or sacrifice, it can remain meaningful to players decades later. One of the clearest examples of this is the original Last of Us. On the surface, it's a game about surviving a zombie apocalypse. At its core though, it's about the relationship between Joel and Ellie, and the emotional journey that they go through together. The story deals with grief, trust, and the moral dilemma of protecting the people that we care about. These themes resonate regardless of when the game is played, which is why the story continues to be discussed long after its release. In a similar way, games like Shadow of the Colossus demonstrate how storytelling in games doesn't always rely on dialogue or lengthy cutscenes. Much of the narrative is communicated through atmosphere, music, and the player's actions. As players progress through the game, the emotional weight of their choices becomes increasingly clear, creating an experience that stays with them long after the final encounter. Even older titles have achieved this kind of lasting cultural impact. Final Fantasy VII introduced themes of environmentalism, identity, and corporate power in a way that resonated with players around the world. Decades later, its characters and story beats are still referenced, discussed, and reinterpreted by new generations of players, such as myself. When a game tells a story that connects with people on a deeper emotional level, it becomes much more than just entertainment. It becomes something that people share, revisit, and pass on to others. In that sense, while games can be timeless because they're fun to play, they're also remembered because of the stories that they told. It's rarely just one thing that makes a game timeless. Instead, it's usually a combination of thoughtful design choices that work together. Clear and intuitive mechanics make the game easy to pick up. Memorable worlds give players somewhere meaningful to explore. Strong aesthetics ensure the visuals remain appealing even as technology evolves. Powerful storytelling allows the experience to resonate long after the game has ended. When these elements come together, a game stops feeling tied to the year that it was released. New players can discover it decades later and still feel the same sense of excitement, wonder, or emotion that players felt when it first came out. The technology may age, but the experience itself doesn't. That's ultimately what makes a game feel timeless. It's not always just nostalgia, and it's not just historical importance. It's the ability for a game to continue connecting with players generation after generation. When a game manages to achieve this, it stops being a product of its time, and instead, it becomes something much more special. It becomes a classic, a game that will always feel worth returning to.